Good evening and welcome to the HUUSD School Board meeting for May 8th, 28th, 2025. My name is Ashley Woods. I am the board chair, and we are in the countdown to the end of school. We have in front of us 6 students, our 2 new student reps, our 2 outgoing senior reps, Celia and Ellie, and our new juniors turn senior reps here pretty soon. So they're kind of taking up the space and it's really great. So welcome to our new people. Okay. I'm looking around for public comment. Do you see anything, Dr. Mike, in Zoom?
One attending and our reporter, so no.
Okay. If anyone is in Zoom and would like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand and we will call on you. All right. There is no one here either, so we're going to move on from public comment to approving the agenda. I hope everyone's had a look, and if so, can someone please make that motion? Bobby makes the motion. Do I have a second? Steve seconds. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, that will pass. Okay. Everyone read the leadership report? Yeah, hopefully. And we are not going to go on about that, except to say that I did confirm today with the Mad River Barn for our retreat on the 28th of June, which is a 3-hour dinner and chat. Yes. He wants to know if he can come, doesn't he? You want to come to that? I guess you could. Yeah, we've never had a student at the dinner, but you're more than welcome. Yes. Any of you can. Yeah. Yes, by all means. I said 20 people, so we're well within that. So it's a little buffet, and then we chat about our plans and ideas and hopes for next year. So yes, you are invited. The 28th, Mad River Barn, 6 o'clock. Emily?
Leadership report says it's the 25th. So I continue to be very confused. Is it the 25th or the 20th? Is it a Wednesday or a Saturday?
It's the Wednesday.
Okay, so it is the 25th.
Don't listen to
no,
me.
the 28th.
Oh, I'm looking at May. I'm sorry, my bad. Yes, the 25th. God, sorry. Everyone, 25th, 6 o'clock, Mad River Barn. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Now I think we're ready to hear from the students. Okay. Oh, wait, sorry. Questions on the leadership report. Go for it.
Thanks. So one of the things says that people should not, no, it's not that they should not, but they should give a heads up if they're getting invited to something to speak as a school board member. So recently, Mike Bishop and I were invited to the Facein PTO because they wanted to talk to us as their reps, and we didn't pass that information along. I feel like that was okay, but I think that this policy is related to that. I just wanted to understand more of the thinking with that kind of situation. Thank you.
It is okay, but in terms of you got invited there as school board members, right? Okay, but nonetheless, school board members. So by letting us know about it, it helps us to stay in the loop and be prepared for what might come after that. And we're all in this kind of collective together. So it's just kind of a courtesy because things can be awkward if we don't know that you've even had a meeting or been invited to a meeting.
Well, recently there was I think majority of, or board leadership met with Moortown, and many of us didn't know about that. And it feels like, you know, if this is a norm we're establishing or if it's a rule, that kind of needs to go both ways, because that was surprising not to have a heads up that leadership was meeting with, you know, another school.
Had actually planned that for quite some time, and it was on, I mean, I'm not sure, it might have been on either side of you being elected, but people did know about that. We met with both Facein and Moortown. Sure. So it's really just courtesy that we don't get blindsided and we know what people are doing when they're representing the board. That's what it's about.
Well, I get that. And courtesy is one thing and a norm is a one thing and a rule is a totally different thing. And so I guess that's what I'm just trying to, I will certainly let you know in the future.
It's not a
But-
policy, so it is a courtesy. Okay. Okay, any other questions on the leadership report? Okay. Moving on to the student report.
Yes, well, after much deliberation and hard decisions being made, we've come to a conclusion of the saga that was deciding on our reps for next year. And it's my great pleasure to introduce them, Emma Aether and Charlotte Burks. And they'll, yep.
Charlotte, a little quick tidbit about me. I play lacrosse. I'm the captain of my lacrosse team, and I'm a part of the Youth Enriching Wellness program here at Harwood, which tomorrow the girls lacrosse team and the U's club, we are hosting a mental health awareness game tomorrow at 4:30 if anyone is interested in coming.
I'm Emma. I am currently on varsity softball and I'm the captain of my golf team. And I'm in student government right now, and we are working to make our school community a better place.
Down to the nitty gritty. Graduation on the 14th. Y'all better be there or else you don't love us. Sorry, that's actually a little dramatic. I, kn- I know Corey's gonna be there. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay.
All right, now some Harwood highlights. Today was the Feast Summit, which was a chance for students from all over the state who are interested in sustainability to go to American Flatbread in Waitsfield and present to other groups of students. I presented, it was pretty fun. I also got to participate in some of the activities, and yeah. The musical department's annual trip to Broadway happened this weekend. Did you go on to that?
I did go on that.
Yeah, they went and saw Great Gatsby and Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Yeah. Prom was a week and a half ago. It was also themed Great Gatsby, which is pretty funny. Uh,
All right, keep talking.
yeah, prom was fun. And then the most recent Socrates Cafe happened last week, which is like, remember when we had somebody come in and taught us about Harkness skills? This is an opportunity for students and community members to come together and talk. I'm not remembering what their focus question was. You know it?
It was, how do we decide what is right and what is wrong? And it was, I came as a guest and it was I think the best conversation I'd had at one of the three I've been to. It was great. And that means it'll probably be better.
Yeah, that's what's happening in Harwood right now.
Spirit Week was last week, everyone. Don't look at the rankings. Don't look. Don't look. Actually, turn your head away. So, yeah, it was after we spent our whole week competing in different events and games and competitions in order to win a plaque for their class on the ugly kilt, which will stay there forever, and bragging rights. And the winners of this year were, next slide. What? One more click. One more click. Yeah, just one more click. The seniors! Woo! We have the best spirit, everyone.
Once again, the juniors came in last.
The juniors did come in last again, which is these guys. Yeah, and you guys lost. All right, that's what we have. Any questions?
Maybe could we go back to the rankings just so everyone has a visual? Oh, no.
No defense. No defense. He's coping right now.
So this is the third year in a row we finished dead last, and I mean last by a significant margin. And I think in the video also the third year where when you're watching the music videos, it's clear that ours is just significantly worse than every other music video. But I want to talk about class council for a second because right now we are going to have a large amount of money to either take our class on a trip or leave an elaborate monument for our memory. So I think our legacy is secured no matter the consistent failures in Spirit Week.
Had a lot of fun.
I also had fun.
It wasn't good mitten, it was bad mitten.
So
There's 21
let me tell you, Celia competed in the Just Dance competition. How'd it go, Celia?
It was against my will. On the team, I was the only person that lost, but we still won. But I didn't help the team. But yeah, we won.
She was there and she helped in spirit. I commentated for no, I didn't. I just watched Twister and seniors got dead last in Twister, but that is just evidence of when you get older, you get less flexible.
I did not participate in anything, but no, but I went around and I like collected what people won and I brought it back to the Council of Highest Integrity and we figured out who actually won Spirit Week. And so I knew that the juniors had lost before they knew they had lost. It was pretty sad to see how excited they were.
He's a prophet, you see.
Thank you, juniors. Yes. Well, that I would hope for nothing less from Celia and Ellie on their way out than a spirited report. So thank you very much. Big shoes to fill, ladies. Get your comedy ready. We won't know what to do if. Oh, that sounds like a challenge. Oh my goodness. Okay. Dr. Mike. Oh, sorry. Before we do that, we have some gifts for Ellie and Celia because they are headed off into the big world and they have served very well in the sport for 2 years. So we have, sorry, whatever. They both were great.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's Dr. Mike's turn.
It's Dr. Mike's turn. Go ahead.
There's a link to my written report, and I will emphasize, along with the very eloquent words about being at the commencement, that all board members are invited. So that's my first update to remind everyone of graduation on Saturday, June 14th at 10 a.m. on the front lawn. And it's a tradition that I have come to love. The tent set up, the graduates right at the school. So if you don't have a senior, but you would like to come, just let us know and we will be sure that you have a ticket for commencement. It's a very special day. I also gave some updates on other things. It's been 3 years since we started, almost 3 years since we started working on restraint seclusion, but I still like to keep track. We still, John and I still review, and I think it's pretty remarkable when you look back to the 2021-2022 school year and see that there were 181 restraints, and you compare that to the current year, May 28th through the current year with 11. So it's been a lot of work by staff and a lot of work by the board in policy, which we have policy discussions tonight, but it just shows the importance of focus and policy and the work that everyone in the school community does. So there are policy reviews, and we had said, Ashley had asked me to put out an update, which I sent when the agendas went, but I also printed in the superintendent report of the overview, since this is the first process. Traditionally, when you introduce new or revised board policies, there's a first reading, which will occur tonight. And then if there's no significant revisions necessary, then we ask the board to warn them. So they get warned in local newspapers for a policy. It's a formal sounding title, but it's the policy hearing, which is actually part of the board meeting, when you then have a chance at the second board meeting to review them again before you pass for final adoption at that meeting. So it just gives the public notice that there's a list of updates we're going to do. Most updates that we get are from the Vermont School Board Association, and it's just more cost effective as part of the school board's dues from across the state, for the school board to hire counsel to review policies and recommend changes, because they do need to be legally defensible. So the School Board Association keeps up, and every couple of months we'll review to see if there's policies to bring up. We try not to do it at every meeting because there is a cost associated with warning them for advertisement. But we do have quite a few. Most of the ones tonight are from the School Board Association. There are two others that came through other means. One is a local wellness policy, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later. And the other is the policy on behavioral threat assessments. Other pieces, on the same night as prom, I had the honor to go to Manchester, Vermont, as part of a celebration for Matt Henshin and Jonah Ibsen, who are two statewide Roland Foundation scholars. Most of you met them at a board meeting when right after we learned that they were successful fellows with the Roland Foundation. And as they said at that point, their fellowship comes with a $150,000 stipend that Lisa works with them on. But both of them, in some cases, some teachers will not be in the classroom all year. Both Matt and Jonah will be sharing a long-term substitute. They will be in school because a lot of their work will be in the school, in the community, but they will be freed up from that time, and they're using funds for that, as well as some other expenses that they'll have. And that's what I have in my report, but I'm always happy to take other questions.
Somebody had brought up that they noticed that the policies were in for first reading, this set of policies, and the same ones were then in the consent agenda for second and warning, right? Is that they shouldn't be?
No, it's not for second and it's for warning, which means that there's usually two readings of the policy when they're adopted. So at tonight's meeting, you are seeing them for the first time, and then you are warning them to go into the newspaper to hear at the next meeting. Yes, correct. So if there's something you want more time to study tonight, you would pull that from the warning. Any other questions?
Any other questions? No? Okay. We don't have anyone in Zoom, so, all right. Board reports. Do you want to say something, Mike? Steve, sorry.
Okay, the Public Outreach Committee had a meeting last week. We were trying to move quickly to address H454, the education reform bill. Uh, I think the bill moved a little too quickly for us, so we're still a little bit in limbo about how to best address it as individual board members. But we did discuss in general that we want to be less behind the curve on public outreach than in the past, more proactive, not so much reacting when the community blows up. So, as one concrete step, if you know there's a budget button on the homepage of the district website with a $ icon, and we'd like to expand it to include, I mean, of course, there will be other budget discussions pretty soon, but also things like H-454 to alert the community if they want to contact legislators, and also the discussion that is coming up with Truex Collins and their evaluations of the schools, because that's a very controversial topic. So I think we'll be investigating this more as we go along. Also, board members have volunteered to post on Front Porch Forum each of the forums that cover our district. So we now have kind of a action team, if you will. And I think as issues come up, we'll send out maybe templates for Front Porch Forum posts, and then individuals are welcome to modify them as they wish. Okay. Good. Please.
One of the things that came up at the outreach committee is actually where to put this kind of information. And there was going to be a discussion with Shannon Wisdom of what she was thinking. I've just had another experience looking through. There is a lot of stuff on our website and how to direct people to get there and what's the best way to have this, the visual for it. But I just encourage everyone, if you haven't looked at our HUUSD.org main page, and if you don't find something that you're looking for, go to the bars at the top that say menu. You have menu, schools, and select language. So there's just a lot there for us to see and work with, and maybe it could be a topic of discussion at some point, you know, of simplifying the search. We have a civilian volunteer, Asher, who's been involved in helping us, and he has quite a lot of expertise with visuals. And when we've talked about where to put things on the website, that came up. Thanks.
Ken, sure that we updated the web page last year, and we went through considerable simplification. And anytime you have a large, complex organization, there's a lot of information. So we created the buttons for frequently asked questions. In addition to the menu, we tried to keep that limited to important topics. But then the other piece I would say is Google is a good search tool, and there is also a search our site, which is a Google search for our site. So you normally can find things pretty quickly. And if we have a parent say, I can't find X, we try to respond to that. But an example is student registration and student enrollment. That's a main topic that we keep there as well. I think one of the other things that the committee discussed at past meetings is just a legislative session is very complex. Our association I belong to, the Superintendent's Association, we have somebody who works for us and spends most days there. And even for her, things change so quickly in a day that I think that's one of the other challenges the committee talked about, that it's hard to keep up and keep the very 186 pages, 125-page bills, to keep that boiled down to something that the public can see and understand. So it's just a challenge I think you deal with other places.
I do want to recognize that this is a lot better than it's been in the past, for sure. Like, all the work that you've done is definitely something, but also as a parent with the kids in sports, and I know this is a little bit different. Like, there's like 2 different apps And then, when there's a snow day, there's something on every phone in the house, and then all the emails, and there's like some level of saturation with so many things, and other things are kind of hard. And we're talking about communicating messages to the public about what's happening with the budget or things like that. Wanting to be real. Is that time? Okay, there we go. Is there, do, very close. Oh, you know what? It's mobile. I don't know where we're all like leaning over. But anyways, do we have, as a district, a communication strategy beyond what the board is doing? We're thinking about all these things and kind of acknowledging all these different apps and all these, just this stuff coming at people all the time. Now I'm done.
We do have a strategy, and so School Messenger is the alert system. So if we have a delay, there's a protocol I think it's just this mic is. And just so everyone knows, I know you've brought up before as a side note technology, but Curtis and Shannon are working with a vendor to upgrade our boardroom technology. So that is a process in works. But there is a strategy. I can just tell you from doing this job for a long time, if I don't think there's anything as over communication. So if the moment you don't put something out is when you get couple dozen calls saying you're not sharing information. But at the same time, when you put it out, then you're also getting people saying, well, I get information too much. And what I say with School Messenger is that is an opt-out or opt-in tool. So you can decide that you don't want to have that. We do try to kind of follow what expectations are in our community for that. The athletic apps, that's something the athletic department does. That's not associated as a district tool. That's a separate protocols.
That's actually the point. Like, I understand why we should snow day and et cetera. And I messaging strategy, thinking about, it's the department doing one thing and another department doing another thing and et cetera. That's what I'm suggesting or just questioning, if there's an appreciation, because it actually is kind of a barrier when it comes to the apps specifically around athletics. So just, is there a system? Are we thinking about those kind of things is that just, it's department?
A part of the district strategy, that would be something that I could share your feedback with the high school athletic department.
So I'm going to be sort of on the opposite side of your comment. I actually think that the school does a really good job of communicating information out, sending emails, sending the text messages, go look at your email. I mean, coming from a background where I'm involved in technology, it's very hard to find something that's going to work for everybody and everybody's preferences. Some people love getting just the mobile alerts. Some people just want emails. I'm team mobile alert because I have so many emails and email boxes that I need something to bring it to my attention. I'm also used to using multiple apps to do different things. So I think we have to remember that the communication styles are always going to have to be a balance and the best that you can do, because there's always going to be a problem that is found. But when focusing and thinking about the stuff that's coming up with the information and H454 and all of that stuff, I think some of our existing communication methods can be some of the most effective. I remember that during the budget issues last year, the email communications, the messaging systems that were used as part of the defaults for school communication. So just want to say that.
So I just wanted to point out that we've got the communication between the schools and parents and that kind of stuff, but we also need to push the communication to everybody else who don't have kids in the school. So I just want to make sure we don't forget about that part.
Point. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thanks for saying that, Rob. I think most of my point around the website, it is an internal internal being everybody that goes to school here and their parents, it's easier to use. But when we were having this conversation with the outreach committee, it was, finding the budget drop down and where we can put in this new information and how to kind of use that way, and then thinking about the totality of all the messaging around that. Yes, Rob, I think that was more succinct to get my point across. Thank you.
I will say this, kudos to Steve Rosenberg, who oftentimes tries to think of all of the different ways we could possibly communicate with people. And being a fellow board member with him, we just attended a Moortown town council meeting together, in which we were trying to get access to actually, everybody in Moortown's email, in addition to front page forum, in addition to what we do with the school board, in addition to, going out and doing outreach stuff with, our communities on weekends. I really do try to follow Steve's lead in the fact that Steve tries multiple different ways to reach different people in their different chosen mediums and what they like to do. And it's not always what this other person likes to do, which does tend to lead us into these multiple different areas, which again isn't necessarily always, to your point, Rebecca, succinct. And it always isn't sort of one size fits all. Sometimes you have to get a little messy in that messaging. But I do agree that if we had a way to be succinct while meeting everyone where they were, that's sort of the goal or the vision of any great communication strategy. So.
Anybody else? Okay. Next is our discussion portion of the meeting, and the first is an update on H454, school reform. Dr. Mike, lucky him.
There have been some good articles about the two bills. The Senate did pass the bill on Friday, and it is in conference committee. I shared with the board a letter that was shared out to governors, the conference committee, and Speaker of the House, just kind of pointing out his areas that are kind of his lines in the sand, so to speak. I can read the headings and summarize them. Funding system. I will not support a bill that spends more than we are today in fiscal year $25. He talks about that. Timeline. I cannot accept an implementation timeline of fiscal year 30. I have proposed fiscal year 28. We've seen, he talks about kind of his reasoning for that. The district task force. I have been clear that I would have preferred the legislature approving new districts this session. However, I'm willing to support the summer district task force, so he's okay with more time with that piece. Property taxes. Talks about his concern with rising taxes, and then education quality. Key priorities: ensuring fair teacher pay, expanding access to career and technical centers, supporting preschool, and providing the right scale and resources to offer our students a well-rounded education. So we'll see what develops this week, and that's kind of where it is right now.
So it sounds a little more hopeful than he'll just veto it. And it makes me think about how many of us are really aware of how a bill is passed. Because I think we really, I thought of it after our outreach meeting the other night. Okay, we see something, we don't like it. It's good to let your legislators know if you don't think they're moving in the right direction. But I think there was also a little bit of a response thinking that, oh, this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen. It doesn't happen that fast, and it does go to conference, and they do try to work out differences. So it may not be, totally encouraging, but it is hopeful. that the governor is getting some of the message as well and willing to compromise a little.
Thank you. I just, one of the things we sort of ran up into or ran into over the past few days was that we had created some text for sending out on Front Porch Forum, at least in Duxbury, on the House Bill 454 and some of the stuff that was going on with that. And then we really got thinking that maybe we really should be holding on that because we can't just keep you know, overloading our legislators with a change, with changes as they come one right after the other and how we feel. Maybe that the best thing would be to wait until the governor actually it was in his hands and we wanted to encourage him either to not veto or whatever. That's all. Steve, it was really helpful that you sent that message out, and said, why don't you hold on this for a few days till we know a little better. I do think we need to be careful about that too, not over it. That's all.
Yeah, I got very good advice from Shannon Dunphy Ball, yet another Shannon, all right, who has experience in the state legislature on speech writing and so on. And she said, you just can't put out a call on Front Porch Forum too many times to ask the community to write about this aspect or that aspect. And since the Senate and House versions of the bill seem to be converging, we thought we would hold off sending out an announcement until we thought the governor would veto the bill. Now it looks like maybe he won't veto it. Maybe they'll work something out. So frankly, I'm at a loss as to what to ask people to write whom and when. And I mean, any advice Dr. Mike or anyone else could give would be very helpful.
It does feel a little saturated. I'm sure they get so many emails, and then we spend these hours crafting this very worded email that we care about every word, and then they've read so many of those 1,000-word emails that they're like, oh my God, I know, so I don't know. I agree that it might be a little bit, you just want to bang your head on the desk on your millionth letter. But go ahead, Dr. Mike.
Just from watching legislative process for most of my life, I think the challenging part to me with this is you were talking about massive change to an education system. And that's why I liked the 4-year time frame, because I think we've learned people don't pay attention. So let's just hypothetically go and say that the legislature would have said, yep, we think 5 districts with 5 school boards, that's a great thing, let's pass it this session. Well, then it takes time to implement. And then I think our experience in talking to people is if most people realize that we're going to have a school board that goes from representing 6 towns to something like 60 towns, that you lose voice. So I think the examples, the governor pointed to an example of things stopping when you put them out. And the experience that I've seen in Act 173, which is multi-tiered systems of support, that's an example of something that was postponed. But it wasn't postponed because people didn't want to implement it or because people were being obstinate or didn't like it. It was being implemented because it talks about the development of very complex systems and refashioning what we do and how that impacts student learning, how it impacts other areas of timelines and legal processes. And it was postponed, and I was not here at the time, but I've heard that Shannon and Leslie can give you more of an example, but it was postponed because it was not implementable in the fashion that it was introduced by the legislature. I think sometimes we have high ideals, but our ideals sometimes come up against the nuance. And we have a large system, and it doesn't change on a dime. So I think that's one of the big processes. And, what concerns me the most is doing things too quickly. We've seen that the public, not that they're not, I think the public's engaged, they just don't understand the details. And we've seen before, once people start realizing details and implications, that's when people show up and speak their voice and learn more. So I just want to have a transparent process that's a process and not something being decided by 180 people in Montpelier.
Just one more thing, Mike, that's been really helpful to us. I think we really have a pretty strong confidence in what you see going on. You're there, you're involved on the commission, you're involved with other things, and you have your experience of many years doing this kind of stuff. It's very helpful to me when you send us out a note that just says, it would be great if you all could write a letter to your representatives, your senators, your governor, whoever, and that you would encourage us, what you would encourage us to say. Obviously not, you're not requiring us to say what you say, but at least giving us what your position is. That's helpful to me.
So I just wanted to point out again, it is challenging to not put anything out because everything is changing. But I think that's exactly what needs to go out, so people at least know where things stand. Right now, they have no clue because there's no communication. So that's when they feel like they're being lied to, or information's held back. And I think that's pretty much just the point, is just putting out there that things are changing daily. There are issues, whatever it is. Highlights from the board. What did we do this week? I think just a few bullet points would be helpful, even if it's not, in detail.
That's a great point, because also what we lose is momentum. So there's the saturation versus momentum, and right. I think it's okay to saturate a little bit if we're going to keep that momentum, so when it is time to act. But I wanted to ask a question of Dr. Mike. You said, going from 6 schools, 7 schools to 60, and that we would lose voice. And I hear that a lot, that's the argument, local control and voice. But we're going to start talking about policies that were created, from top down outside of here. And we have so many constraints with our budget. I'm curious to know how we currently exercise voice or local control that would be lost.
Currently, you have, I know there was discussion. Number one is a school. It's possible to attend meetings when you have a large district, and you have 5 board members for 60 towns. You would not have that. So that ability to go to however many schools we have, but there is still a lot of control that local schools have, and I'm not advocating that change doesn't have to happen, but I think if you're going to move to something that's drastically different for Vermonters, that you have to do it in a thoughtful way to make sure that that's a change people are comfortable with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but I'm curious about, when I'm thinking about pulling out my pitchforks or whatever, what does it really mean to lose local control?
One way, it means that if say they did do 5 districts, which it doesn't sound like that's going to be a reality, but right now, the people, or you very nearly know them, or you can call them. I don't know if I would be comfortable calling someone I absolutely didn't know from another town about a school board issue or a school issue in our town. Like, how do I call a guy from Belvedere who's probably never even been here or been down this far, because that's the very top of that district, and expect them to understand my situation, at the Warren school, say.
Oh.
An important an important part of local control is voting on the budget, and that would this H454 would not allow voting on the budget. You wouldn't be going to town meeting to vote on a local school budget anymore.
I would honestly call what we're doing right now some local control because we have everyone from every town in our district represented, giving voice, and 5 people for 60. Like, I feel like that's just kind of, I mean, I know this is just for me, but like an automatic understanding of like lack of local control is literally you might not have a voice for your town. And what are you going to do about it? Like, there's not much you can do. And that's just taking away your power of being able to advocate for yourself and for your town. And that's just a power drop, like getting rid of it within itself. Like, I feel like it's very clear that we would lose local power. And yeah.
For instance, one of the things that we do as a school board that you guys haven't had an opportunity to see yet, but when we have an executive session because there's been an issue about either a staff person or something going on with a student, that comes in. And then you have a group of people that come from your community and from your towns making some decisions about whether or not something needs to change, something needs to have been done about that situation. And that actually comes out then to a vote that drives kind of what happens. Then without that, you would have these 12 people, 60 people, 30 people who haven't been here and don't really have that kind of a personal connection even. I don't know if that explains that very well. You got that?
I get what I mean, if we're having a hearing about a student or about a teacher in a closed session, and that closed session is people that have no concept of or who these people are, right? That would be a disadvantage for the people that were being tried or whatever, and the culture of that. Go ahead, Emily.
I feel like one of the big things is that the districts, whatever they are, is just going to fall into the law of averages too. So like there's going to be a cap on per pupil spending. So if this library that we're sitting in needs to have more books added to it, but we've already hit our per pupil spending, we're not going to be able to advocate for why we're going to need to update the book collection in the library. That's only going to happen if we exceed the per pupil spending cap, and that's when it would go to a community vote. But if those things never happened, then we sit here with the same books in the library. There's no ability to advocate for that. Like, those are some of the examples that I feel like are being taken away. And then there's also strange formulas about things like being able to try to get renovations or upgrades to your buildings. Those are all things that you don't necessarily have your own control over. You have to basically put together a reason to then send to whoever your leaders are in your district for them to then decide whether or not does Harwood really need a upgrade to their soccer field or to the track or to the HVAC system that's been needing to be replaced for the last 20 years, because they could then say, well, this other school is actually going to need it more, so you don't have that say for that. I see nodding heads, so I think I'm understanding things as I'm reading through. One of the things that I have found to be really helpful, as much as it is not entertaining, the YouTube channels for the state, for the House Education, going through. I did spend time watching those videos, looking at the comparisons between the House and the Senate versions, because as much as you go through and read them, I've read through that document on my own. I made some notes. I sent emails of clarification to Dr. Mike to make sure I was just understanding in general what I was reading, but this is the kind of document and thing that we have to all read over and over again with each revision, because as we all sit here and talk about how we have to make sure that we're updating our community, we have to also make sure that we can have a valid conversation that actually has facts behind it versus just assumptions. So that's, I feel like, one of our first goals is to do our individual best to stay as up to date as it is, even though it's changing all the time, because we're not going to be able to advocate for the community to come together if this is something that we feel is not good for our district.
Anecdote, if it's okay, Ashley. I was thinking about how, Rob, before you were a board member, you came here and you talked on behalf of your son and you advocated for the nurses and how important the nurses are. And then you joined the board. That's not going to be possible with a 5-member board for 47 or 60 towns. And that type of emphasis on local control is really I think that's one of the most important things we're losing.
And the last thing that I want to say about local control is that if all of this ends up happening, our board chairs can be a part of only the interim board. You are then going to be eliminated, which then means there is zero local feedback. I mean, for at least the first year, and then I think it was the first year in whichever version we're in right now, it's a limited period of time that existing chairs of school boards can be a part of things, and then eventually it's just elected representatives who are paid.
So
Sure, we're following Robert's rules, but we, I think it's tremendous that Rebecca asked this question. I think it's wonderful we're having this discussion. And I would put in a vote for hoping this might be something we could take up at our retreat, because I think there's a lot of sides to this point. And I can agree with everyone. And then I'm also hearing some people saying, I think Vermont's going to get to a point where we have one school district. So there's a lot of different opinions. And I think trying to figure out what we need to hear it all. It needs to be planned. And I think this kind of conversation is great, and I hope we continue it.
So whenever I think about solutions, I think about two different things. I think about what is the problem they're trying to solve, and is the solution that they're coming up with solving the problem? And then I think, if there are politicians involved, is what they're trying to do, trying to get them reelected. So the answer to the second question is, of course, yes, and we can all see through that. But in this particular case, you can't phone this one in, right? And so that's what we're telling our state legislatures. You can't phone this one. You can't redesign the entire education system in 2 seconds, phone it in, slap a label on it, and say, good enough. If you're going to redesign it for the entire state of Vermont, you have to leave all of your politics at the door. You have to put your thinking caps on, and then you have to actually think this one out. And you have to call in the experts, and you have to say, will this work? And it requires a lot more than just tax savings. It requires whether or not you actually are solving a problem with your solution, which means defining the problem to begin with. And of all of the things that they've come up with, I have noticed that we have not even begun to mention the real driver of all of this, which is healthcare. So as we begin to find all of these various solutions for all of these, various vague problems that are coming up, I want us to be really sort of very clear from the local perspective that as we start to come up with solutions that immediately slash local control and give us over to regional control, what are we gaining in that? Are we solving anything in that? Because from my standpoint, we've not solved any metrics. We've gained nothing, but we have created vast new problems. And in creating vast new problems, we've gotten a whole bunch of people reelected in the short term. And so that's my warning to the state, is that you might get reelected in the short term, but Vermonters are incredibly smart, and you might fool them for one reelection cycle, but that's why you're reelected every 2 years. You're not going to fool them again. So, and regardless of your political party, if you don't solve this problem, you are going to lose your seat. So, I hope everyone in the state is paying very close attention, because we certainly are at the local level.
Thank you, Ben. Okay. Anybody have any other comments on that? On the H454 or our, I love the idea, Bobby, of bringing that to the retreat. It's perfect for that. And yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Go on. Okay. I particularly like Rob's comment that it's okay to put out communication saying, we don't know what's going on. You know, I mean, it's important. Yeah. Yeah.
Add to that. So one of the other points was, you know, other than saying it here, do they know that we're still owed $500,000 and we still haven't gotten that back? You know, just those little added bullet points.
An answer to your question, Steve, earlier about what we can put out and where. That's some good stuff. Thank you, Rob. Okay, the next piece of discussion is Bobby is going to lead us through a little discussion about open meeting law and that kind of fun stuff. And that what's PD, professional development, which is part of our services. We are required to take some PD along the journey each year. And Bobby was kind enough to do this for us this time and has done PD for us before. So go ahead.
Okay, and Cindy has my slideshow. So I'm gonna get into this first. The reason maybe that I got interested in professional development is because I'm a lifelong learner, and we're on the school board, and I kept hearing about open meeting law. I knew what Robert's rules were, but I didn't know this, so I'm not a lawyer. And I will say that our lawyer, the school lawyer, Pietro, has a wonderful presentation that has all kinds of fun, you know, role plays and everything. And I was thinking of doing that, but I didn't have time this week. So I'll give you a brief introduction. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. I don't know, Cindy, or how do I? Oh, she's got it. Okay. So this is just a little intro on the open meeting law. And one of the things to keep in mind, we're talking about these issues now, transparency and how to keep, and outreach and engagement and how to keep our public involved. But we actually, as elected school board officials, have a legal duty to do this, which means we have the rules governing what we say and do publicly as well as behind the scenes. And we can get in trouble if we don't follow this. We can be cited. And there was a case recently for a recent Harwood school board. It happened. What's interesting when you read the history, because I did look it up, and if you're interested, you can look it up on Google. It was kind of around the same time we were talking about closing one of our schools, Basin School, and there was a board discussion that involved personnel, and it got quite heated. And it was actually two board members who complained to the Secretary of State's office that they felt that we had violated open meeting, that the board had. So it hit close to home. As a result of that, and usually what happens if you are penalized, sometimes there's a penalty, could be $500 for an individual who wrongfully abuses the law. But also, in addition to this, you have to make a plan that this won't happen again. So it's important that we as school board members know what this law is. So anyway, and this was taken from an older presentation that I found that I think was actually from Caledonia. school district. And it may not have the most up-to-date things, but I thought that this um, PowerPoint did a good job. So here's some rationale. We provide advance public notice of that we require all meetings of public bodies to be open to the public unless a specific exception applies. In order to make a meeting open to the public body must provide advance public notice of the meetings, including meeting agendas, discuss all business and take all actions in meeting unless an exception applies, allow members of the public to attend the meetings, and to take meeting minutes. And we are lucky that we have an excellent secretary who's been taking minutes for a long time, Carol. I don't know, and is she considered secretary of the board, or what? I don't know what she. Yeah, Carol Chamberlain. So you never see her at our meetings, but she is listening to all our meetings and recordings. And these meetings are recorded also. And that gets to the interesting discussion where we used to have a board recap. And the danger of a board recap is you might leave something out. The idea was to have something other than the minutes to make it more palatable or digestible. But our minutes are very easy to read, and they are all posted. Our minutes and our agendas are all posted on our website, available for everyone to see. So it seems like that could be a hazardous practice. Okay, recapping. All right, so then here's some definitions. What's a public body? So that they explain it here. It's any board, council, or commission of the state, or it goes on, any committee of the foregoing boards. So when we have committee meetings, if we have ad hoc committees, those meetings are public meetings, and those are open to the public. Is there anybody here who is sort of a beginner with what open meetings are, or feels like they could benefit from that? I know we have some lawyers on our board, but I mean, maybe for new board members, and for old board members too, you might find some things that are surprising. Okay, what's a meeting? This is an important one. And I remember in the slideshow we saw a few years ago, the presentation from the lawyer showed people going to a basketball game, and a group of people getting together and asking, board members, well, what do you think about such and such? If you have a quorum of the membership, that's a public meeting. And you could, if somebody overheard you that was upset about it, they could cite you for violating that. So be careful, even, informal gatherings. And I find myself doing it sometimes. Like, well, I did the tour of the schools and, well, I'm coming to this opinion. Well, that's my opinion. But if I met with a quorum of board members and was saying, okay, here's what I think, and we're having some kind of decision-making meeting, or getting a group of us together that are going to advocate a position, that then could be questionable. So a meeting is a gathering of a quorum of the members of a public body for the purpose of discussing the business of the public body, or for the purpose of taking action. So discussing what is our business, and we can look through guidelines, and that we had the I forget where it is. This is an old one, but school board member guide. Go back through that and learn about what is the reason for our being in this business. But I think Pierre gave us the basic reason is to establish policy and vote on the budget and hire employees. Okay. Do you have to be physically present for the meetings? Well, COVID taught us that might not be possible. And for a number of reasons, we've kept the ability to have that you can attend a meeting via Zoom. But if that happens, there's still, if you participate in the meeting remotely, you have to be able to hear and be heard throughout the meeting. And they mentioned Skype. Skype has retired, but speaker, using Zoom the way we use it now, you can be appropriate. And the other thing that I remember, I think was in one of the leadership reports or the guide, is not to leave. You can't turn on your screen and then walk away from it. You need to be present. So even if you're in the other room, boiling water or whatever it is, and you can still hear, you're supposed to be seen. Okay, each member who participates remotely should identify themselves. So, and I don't know if and that's remotely. We didn't we didn't do that tonight, or we did? No.
No.
'Cause- Yeah, we didn't have anyone online. Okay. And,
I think we did. 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 I think we
Okay, I'm looking at Dr. Mike, and the other thing is we don't say who we are at the board meeting, I guess. Well, we have our name tags, so people can see that. Okay, let's see. Whoops. What is a meeting? Okay. Yeah.
So our kind of ad hoc committees have all Zoom meetings, and that's okay, right?
That is okay. Yeah.
And why?
Well, I don't know. Okay, Mike, Dr. Mike. can-
And there was another point I wanted to bring up because sometimes people
Okay.
have asked, well, can a quorum of the board, a quorum of the board isn't, if a committee is only 3 people, a quorum of the board isn't 2 people, but the law, section, chapter 1 of VSA, I can't remember the exact chapter number, states that a public body is also any duly appointed committee of the board agency. So if you have a quorum, there was a select board in another part of Vermont that was sued, taken to court because they decided, well, we'll take little work groups, unofficial work groups, and then we will do work outside just one-on-one and won't advertise that. Well, you can't do that. That's still a public body.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
But in answer to your question, the law for video meetings changed temporarily during COVID. They did an update last year. And in that update, since ad hoc committees are advisory, they do allow, the law does allow ad hoc committees to meet all virtually.
Okay, and that's because we're not decision-making bodies.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Right.
For quorum purposes, the quorum of an ad hoc committee is a quorum of those committee members, not the whole board, right?
Correct. So that's why even committee meetings need to be warned properly, and there needs to be public access.
Yeah, and I think I do have a slide later on that explains what a quorum is. I should say I lifted a lot of this from another slideshow, and one of them actually had something about COVID. So, but I thought this was good enough that it goes over it, and I did just email everyone a link to a YouTube that the Secretary of State's office made. It's completely updated with the new laws, and we were able to see it at the Vermont School Board Association conference in the fall. If anybody, when that comes up, there's an opportunity to go to that conference, and I've gone twice. Usually it's board leadership, but you're welcome to go as a board member, and I would encourage anyone who has an interest to go. It was excellent. Okay, so we got over whether we have to be physically present. And now you're right, we moved ahead to group emails. Okay, this is the issue of not to reply all. And there, I will give you some instances when it's okay to do that, or when it's okay to send a joint email if it's an admin. That comes up later in another slide. Serial communications, that's the next slide. That's an interesting one because the law seems to allow for gathering over time successive interrelated private conversations, often in email, about the board's business that taken together could constitute a quorum. So you have to be, careful about that. Let's see, social media groups. So that also applies to groups like Facebook, Front Porch Forum, other online group where a quorum number of members in a public body raises the open meeting law concerns because the body's business is discussed, and so that's another warning. I'm supposed to do this quickly, so yeah.
If that, you said Front Porch Forum, are you meaning, I don't understand how that would, like if you blasted out information and members of our board were also on that Front Porch Forum, that could be a problem?
I think it's an exception. I mean, I think that if you're offering information, that's one thing. If you are stating a position that could sound like a decision, and other people are advocating that and maybe encourage each other, if they're school board members, they could be at risk. Okay, anything else to add to that? Or do you think
Well, I just wanted to add to this that I did happen to notice yesterday when I was on the Vermont School Board page, they have a really good write-up about social media and posting, and a lot of it is very similar to many of the things that you're discussing right now. So it's a sort of a great way of pulling together and sort of saying proper ways to phrase things if you are going to be putting something out there. I found it to be really helpful.
Yeah, maybe you could send that link out too. That's a good thing. To that.
I'll send it to Dr. Mike,
Okay.
right? Is the proper way to do it.
And the key for this all is quorum, right? Which is like a percentage of this body. And so it's really about the numbers, right? Is that correct? Like if it's two of us, not necessarily about social media in general, but for at the VG and we're having a conversation, that's not an open meeting law issue. However, if there's 8 of us, right, that's when it's a problem. Like it's a percentage of the board or of the committee, but that's what quorum means. And that's one of the facets of this. You need to hit quorum. Okay, I wasn't getting that.
I think it's worth mentioning that there's also the appearance of impropriety is also, and that's why we're not, kind of like why you wouldn't get on the phone with a fellow board member. I mean, you could talk it out, but you're not forming a joint opinion and then moving forward with that. You know what I mean? That you got to do in this setting.
Ashley,
go ahead.
Serial communication she was talking about earlier too. So if you called me and you wanted to talk about business and then you called Rob and then you called Ben and then you called, everybody, that would also be a problem too. So it could just be 2 people chit-chatting, but if you keep having those serial conversations, it becomes a problem then as well.
Or quorum legally for this board.
So it's
Really?
unique. It depends on who you're hanging out with. If you've got your 4 friends from Waterbury, you're heavy in the quorum. Remember that. That's like everyone's got a little different. Just so students know. Hold on one second, Cashel. Some of the smaller towns have smaller percentage of a vote. Like I'm from Warren and mine is 7.2. The Waterbury is 9.75. I think Moortown is 5 or 5.2. So it is.
We all talk to Cashel.
Yeah, Cashel has the highest. No, go ahead, Cashel. What were you gonna say?
Wouldn't it be like if you're calling someone, no matter the amount, if it's you two making a business decision, isn't that exactly what the people in the select board did? And that was in violation? Like that, if you're making a business decision, it's not in a public setting, that's against the law. Is that?
2 people can't make a business decision. I mean, they're not going to. And board members are allowed to talk to each other and have and agree on things. And it's not that. It's correct me if I'm wrong. We are collectively working together. So when we do it in committee, that advisory group comes back to this table and tells us what they found and what they thought, and we take that advice and we take their work. But really, we have to make decisions here in this room and have these live conversations. That's what transparency really is. I mean, in terms of the school board, and I think over time we found that that's really important here.
I want to point
Go
out
ahead.
one thing that I believe it still includes, even if there's nobody from Duxbury here, they're still part of the quorum count.
That applied when we did not have all seats filled. So they're part of the overall count for how many people you have. So if you only have, if you have 9 board members and it takes 8 to make a quorum, with your full complement, if you have 6 board members there, you don't have a quorum. So that number is to calculate the overall percentage of the board for a quorum at a meeting. So if you have, when the board was without members, it was important that almost everybody was here to make sure that we had enough people to take official action. So you're right.
So more than 50% of the board has to be present for us to have a legal meeting. And then we can make decisions, and a quorum, if it were 50%, just say a quorum of that would be 25%. So in terms of what does it mean when you're not at this table and who you're talking to and like what percentage you 2 add up to or whatever, that doesn't really matter, I guess. So, but go ahead.
Follow up to that because Steve and I, there you are, we were having a conversation about the outreach committee right over here with Shannon. Dumpy Ball, I don't think that's her name, but Shannon. And, we were doing this like, wait, is this open meeting law? Should I not be part of this conversation? And so that's why I'm asking about quorum. We weren't making decisions. We were just doing logistics and we were trying to be really pure about it. But it was, totally unnecessary in that situation.
And Bobby mentioned, I think she knows where I'm, go ahead. You can talk about.
Of a slide that will address this later. But I mean, the way the organization of the slide chart might have done it differently. But there are exceptions. And if you're doing administrative stuff, planning when your next meeting is going to be, that kind of thing, you can certainly talk about that and email about it. Yeah. Okay.
Not a quorum, and if it's a committee, remembering that a committee is just advisory, so you can't really you can't make any decisions. You can influence our decisions, but that's your job.
And the community members are non-voting members. So
yeah, and Shannon is non-voting, so.
Okay. We've got a real team going here. I have a friend once who was nominated for the National Teacher of the Year award and went to Washington, and she had so much to say. She just talked really fast. It was almost unintelligible. Okay, so collective editing of online documents. This actually came up at our committee meeting. Can we work on this document when we're not in a meeting? So collective editing, even if performed by members individually and over time, may be a meeting under this on VSA, this is 310.3a, if a quorum ends up discussing business outside of the public view. So that's interesting. So I don't know, that one's kind of vague to me. I'm not really sure, but I think it's saying that if we, well, I don't know how that would work if we had a document and we were editing it and it was a public document.
Not here at this table. We've edited our public document in a group when we're in committee meetings together. Yeah.
And I think what that's saying is if you're at the meeting and Steve has some ideas that he talks about, and Rebecca has some ideas, and you say, "Hey, I'll take your ideas. I'll come up with a document and I'll bring it back to our next meeting or share it with the board at the next board meeting." That one person can kind of take that and do it independently, but it then has to come back to the group.
The Secretary of State recommendation was to name a point person who collects and compiles each member's comments for later discussion at a duly warned meeting. So that's exactly what you did. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. Okay, here we are. What is a quorum? That's our next. A majority of the members of the public body. It is calculated by counting the number of total positions on a board or committee, regardless of any vacancies or recusals. That's what we just said. What is business? Business is a public body's governmental functions, including any matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Oh, you have a question?
I think you're doing great. Keep going.
Yeah, a little encouragement, right. Okay, this is not a meeting. Okay, this answers Rebecca's question. Administrative functions such as scheduling a meeting, organizing an agenda, or distributing materials to discuss at a meeting, clerical work, or work assignments of staff and other personnel. Routine day-to-day administrative matters that do not require action by the public body, so long as no money is appropriated, spent, or encumbered. Other functions. Occasions when a quorum of a public body attends social gatherings, conventions, training programs, press conferences, media events. Those are not a meeting. Meeting of a different public body, a gathering of a quorum of a public body at a duly warned meeting or of another public body. Okay, then we have another slide. I don't want to go too fast. Anyway, site inspections for tax assessments or abatements. Bilateral collective bargaining negotiations as decided by the Vermont Supreme Court, between a school board negotiating committee and a labor union. So like when we negotiate a contract. Okay. But if members of the body stray into discussing the business of the body at any of these gatherings where a quorum is present, a meeting will have taken place. All right, let's see, we're on slide 16. Okay, then this has to do with giving notice, how we give notice of regular meetings. And that's what we do. We, normally meet every other Wednesday. It's 6 o'clock, and so those are regular meetings when we tell people where we meet, and we usually adopt a resolution setting the time and place of the meetings. Okay, special meetings, a meeting at a time or place outside of a regular meeting schedule, and you need at least 24 hours notice before each special meeting. And you have to give notice of the time, place, and purpose to the newspaper or radio station serving the area, as well as any person who has requested in writing to be notified. And all public bodies must give oral and written notice to each member unless a member has waived this notice. The next slide is emergency meetings. An emergency meeting may be held only when necessary to respond to an unforeseen occurrence or condition requiring immediate attention. For instance, flooding in a school, or, we've had some weather emergencies. Emergency, they don't require public announcement or 24-hour notice as long as some public notice is given as soon as possible before the meeting. And an emergency meeting should not be used if the public body is able to comply with the 24-hour notice requirements. Just a few more slides. Everyone will bear with me. At least 48 hours notice of a regular meeting and 24 hours notice with agendas that we post them. And so that gets on our website, and there are no agenda requirements for emergency meetings. Makes sense. What must an agenda contain? The law does not define agenda. Okay, so that's good. So it's, but we use a template here, and it works really well. And the nice thing about our template, if you're ever having to take minutes at a meeting, is you can also, in the third column over, write the minutes. And that just gets added to the agenda, so you don't have to rewrite the agenda. The Secretary of State recommends, in keeping with the law's intent, an agenda should allow interested members of the public to be reasonably informed about what specific topics will be discussed and what actions will be taken at the meeting. The next slide, what does it say? What information must it contain? Let's see. Changing an agenda, which we've done here at the beginning of a meeting. Somebody makes a motion that they want to amend the agenda, and that's how we do it, using Robert's rules. Last minute agenda items, especially those requiring board action, be added at a meeting only in an emergency. Public body, that's an interesting one, though, going back to that and thinking that we should try to post anything we want to bring up at a meeting beforehand and not add it to an agenda that people have already known that we'll be discussing. But we could ask that it be warned for another meeting. Yeah, okay. Meeting minutes, we have somebody who takes our minutes, and so they cover what they need to do, and it's a permanent record of any formal actions. Let's see, minutes. In the minutes, this tells you what to include. I'm going to go by that. They're public records, and that's what we were discussing with the idea of, having adaptations of the minutes. We have a formal public record, and if we somehow were different, that could hurt us. Right. Okay. Boy, there's a lot to go through. Yeah, okay. So I think maybe we could, just the rest of this is covered if you watch the Secretary of State's video. And I think the main thing to conclude is this is something that we are required to pay attention to, and we should be paying attention to it. I sort of take the role, it's not the same thing, but a friend of my family's was a judge in Massachusetts. He never talked about his cases. He like what the decision might be, and I mean, just being aware that we have a lot of information here. The wrong information gets out, people get upset. Are we speaking on behalf of the board ourselves? It's just easier to do it all in a public meeting and then it's all discussed. It's hard with a board this size and that's why the ad hoc committees have been nice because you can have a little freer conversation. So that's pretty much all I was going to say. What else? The penalties, I sort of talked about that in the beginning. And if you go to our website and you go to the board meetings, on that page talks about the penalties and of a violation, if you have a violation. And this is the final thing. If there's any other questions, we can ask them here. And that is the link on the very last slide. Yeah. That I sent everybody in an email, but it was still in the blown up font. So I will send a. It works. It goes right to it, doesn't it? Yeah. And I thought that was an excellent presentation that they did. So I'm done. If okay. Thank you.
Thank you for making that not excruciatingly boring. I know it was. Thank you. All right. That was good. So thank you. Okay, we are going to move on to our policy first read, and Mike's going to explain that a little bit.
And we have a number of policies up, and I had shared some notes that I made that I can go through. But the first reading, we don't actually, again, for new board members, we send them out with the agenda, so you have time to review them. And then the first reading, we don't read verbatim the whole policy, but we do go through each one to see if there's questions or comments on anything. So the first one is personnel recruitment, selection, appointment, and background checks. And it's a recommended model policy, which addresses those areas. The School Board Association added administrative responsibility section and removed detailed steps under the appointment section. And also, in the process of reviewing it, they've removed a model policy for consideration, which was titled personnel files, because that's been incorporated into this area. So any questions?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to open your notes at the same time. Were you just talking, is this background checks yet?
Nope, this is
Sorry.
personnel recruitment, selection, appointment, and yes, in the background checks.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I do have a question. Let me see. There is a section in there about contractors of employees of contractors who may have unsupervised contact with students. So the current practice that I understand is that these folks need to have background checks.
Contractors who are in the building need to have background checks.
And so I have firsthand knowledge of a student who works with Elevate Youth Services, mental health services. And this person was in incredible trauma and was not able to have somebody from Elevate work with her until the fingerprints were done, which is like the fingerprints and then the vetting and et cetera, which is about a 6-week process. But this is somebody who is licensed with the state as a mental health professional, but she couldn't come into Harwood without having fingerprinted here through our school to get access to serve this kiddo.
That's true. If they're coming into the building and working with the student privately, they have to be under state law. They have to receive a background check.
So I don't, is that actually state law? Because I don't believe that is. I think that it's a school by school, district by district. And I would love for us to look at adding a provision if somebody is licensed in a certain field. Our second, cost driver is, mental health services, and they're really hard to get. And this is a real situation, and it just doesn't make any sense to me how it benefits the kids in this situation when they're clearly not a risk.
Right. I would advise against that because even if they have a license, that license could have been issued 20 years ago. It is not a wise practice.
So it could be an ask for a current license or some sort of current evidence, because holding somebody off from that kind of mental health care for 6 to 8 weeks while it goes through a process that's redundant is not beneficial to kids.
Just to let you know, I've been teacher for 25 years. I am a teacher currently in South Burlington School District. In order to be a level 3 volunteer here at Harwood, I actually had to go through the fingerprinting background check in order to come here. It was a nuisance. It was irritating. However, it's true wherever you do that. If I were to be a sub, or if I were to go to and be a summer school teacher or whatever, volunteer in any sort of school district anywhere in the state, I'd have to get a background check, and that's true for any sort of school district
That's not the
setup.
same scenario.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know that because you said licensure,
Right.
that people with licensures that work in multiple school districts, they're sort of used to that kind of setup. But I hear what you're saying. It's just you mentioned licensure, so I
Yeah.
just
But just to be clear, that's not the same scenario, and that does make a lot of sense. I mean,
Yeah.
make it easier.
It is state law that they have to have a background check before they start in the school,
Before they start what?
before they start in the school.
No, I'm not talking, I'm talking about somebody from Elevate Youth Services, which is they do mental health services, working with a student in this building. They couldn't get access to this building until they did all those things. So this is a known entity, similar to Washington County Mental Health, and they couldn't get access to a kid who needed it because of the 6-week process.
But they can meet, if it's not part of the school program, they could meet outside of the school day. If they're considered a contractor or doing it in school, they need to go through the process to get a background check.
High needs kids need to be seen in school.
Okay, I'm happy to.
I just, when you were saying licensure, like I'm licensed to the state, I've never had to go get fingerprinted for part of my license. So my concern with making a change like that is that someone who has a license to be a mental health worker or a doctor or whatever, they may not have had to go through a licensure process that required fingerprinting and a background check. I don't know what all the requirements are, but it could vary profession to profession. So I think having a blanket exception could be problematic.
I mean, it's in place for the safety of the students also. Like we get it's very important to have mental health resources, especially for high need students. But there are 583 students at this school. And well, I just read something about it actually. And all of them need to be guaranteed safety, even if this individual hasn't been fingerprinted. Like say they've been fingerprinted for something like 10 years ago, that was 10 years ago, and they have a license. So I feel like with mental health, there should be some understanding, like, okay, yeah, I need to, especially with what's going on with our schools, like with unknown entities coming into schools, like that's something that we need to crack down and be safe with, even if it might take, if they're very high need and this is someone who works outside the school, then there are other ways that they can meet. So I feel like having the fingerprint process is necessary.
And we do, to Ben's point about volunteers and other positions, there is a backlog and it is taking a long time. So depending on the level of, for example, a volunteer, if they go get their fingerprints, we get a preliminary report back. If they are not alone with students, then that is something where we will allow them a provisional, knowing that the process has started and knowing that we have kind of the preliminary unofficial results back, as long as that is clear at that time. But one of the key things is being alone with students, and that yeah.
As a school or school district rather, do we have sort of on hand crisis mental health providers that are already on an approved list? So in this situation, it sounds like there was a student that needed something that was a bit of a specialty. Has the school district considered sort of having somebody, or say Washington County Mental Health, and was it whatever the other organization is, if those are resources that may or may not be needed throughout the school year, would it be something that would be beneficial if they have somebody who has cleared in advance should they need to go into the school to assist with a mental health crisis?
And I don't know the details of the background, so I'd be happy to take that information and check into it more in depth. But I can tell you, though, the process is important. And I can give you examples of situations where there are a few prohibited violations, but there are things that come up that concern us that it is important that we would be held liable should something happen and we didn't at least go through that process, especially in situations where somebody's in a room alone with students. So I'm happy to take information and check back on that further.
I think that's where an idea of maybe having sort of an advanced screening could be something that could be beneficial. That way there's not somebody who's having to wait 6 weeks. The person may never be called on, may never have to come into the school, but maybe an idea of a compromise that could be considered.
So this is in state law, so we can't do anything about it.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
You want to send it around? Or I'll just Google.
I just wanted to put out a real world example. Didn't we have a licensed physician that was working with children and who was recently, put in jail? Right. So that's number one. Oh, and I'd just like to also point out, I did have to do a volunteer level 3. I had to do another background check when I became a substitute teacher. When I worked for the government, the federal government, I had to have a background check every year. So just, it's out there. It's something that I think just needs to happen.
Like I said, it is challenging, especially when positions come up, jobs come up, and there is a backlog, but it is something that we take seriously. Like I said, I can give examples, and very much like Rob, I worked in a state that went through a significant number of changes and intense scrutiny because of the Jerry Sandusky scandal at Penn State University. So there is reason why this is a high priority, but again, we try to have some reasonableness in doing it as long as the person starts the process and isn't in a room alone with students.
So what is the criteria if somebody has a background check? Just anything, any kind of interaction with criminal justice system is a deal breaker, or specifically certain kind of violations?
There is a prohibited offense in code, and I can pull up the language for you. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there is also discretion in that. I'll give an example. Sometimes we see clearances coming back with 1 DUI. DUI is not a prohibited offense. That is something that doesn't impact somebody in a classroom with children. If I got a clearance in that said that the person was convicted last year of a more serious crime, even if it weren't a prohibitive one, then that would be something that would be concerning. The statute also says that if you receive one back that has a violation, you have to share that with the applicant. So there's a whole process of also sharing criminal clearances with people who have applied for a position or a volunteer position.
So what about potentially sharing information from other districts? Like if somebody from Elevate or Washington County Mental Health or whatever work over in a different district and they've gone through the process, making it reciprocal.
It has to be our district, from our district. And I can also I'll give you another example that I share sometimes with people who say, well, I just got a clearance. So when I applied as superintendent here, the first thing I did before I interviewed was I decided it would be good to have my license before I applied for a job. So I applied for my license, and as part of that, for an educator, I had to get fingerprinted. So I had to get fingerprinted, send it in, get a clearance. Board hired me. Then the next thing, as an employee, you have to get fingerprinted. So as an employee, about 3 months later, I got fingerprinted for a second time, went through the process. And then the Agency of Education reached out to me and said, oh, by the way, you need to get fingerprinted. To which I said, well, I've been fingerprinted for my license, and I've been fingerprinted for employment with Harwood Unified Union School District. And they said it doesn't matter because the statute says specifically that if you are hired as a superintendent in the state of Vermont, you must get a criminal clearance through the Agency of Education. So within the course of 6 months, I was fingerprinted and went through the Vermont Crime Information Center 3 times. So There are some things that maybe to the common person doesn't make sense, but there's also statute, and we do have to do our best to abide by those statutes.
Wondering if we're just missing something here. So if that person was not alone and there was a level 3 person there with that other licensed person, that would have been okay, right?
We would have wanted the person to start the process and had somebody. So we've had situations where we've had somebody else in the classroom with somebody who, but we try to do our due diligence. I'm guessing, and I'll do some confidential checking with the name, but my guess is that the challenge is if it's a one-to-one counseling situation with an outside counselor, they're not going to want to have a third party there. So
Em said it, it's, patient confidentiality.
you're right.
While we're deep in the weeds on this, and this is a bit more procedural, but do we require volunteers and potential employees to pay for this process?
Yeah, they have to pay for the process.
Is that best practice with volunteers if we're trying to encourage them to help?
I would say, I don't know about best practice, but I would say I have not heard of a district that has people pay, and we do have. My assistant keeps the list. We have a whole lot of people who go through the process, so I would say it would be something that the finance director probably would not be recommending.
Is there anything in here for instances of professional misconduct? If mental health professional was in here, something that didn't rise to a crime, so it wouldn't be found by a fingerprinting, but is there anything to cover instances of professional misconduct?
I mean, from outside of the school, I would say that would be handled by the licensure board, that if there was some kind of professional misconduct, that they would be the one who would take the action. If I'll give you an example of a teacher. If a teacher is accused of professional misconduct, it goes through the Agency of Education. There's a whole process that has to be followed, that I have to follow as superintendent, that the state has to follow, and that is a process that there would be an official action taken by the state on that person's license if they are found to be in violation of those criteria. So then their license would be revoked. We actually can get online, take a look at all people's. Right. It's also, once it goes through that whole process and it is adjudicated, then it is publicly listed.
As we're, thinking about, I'm thinking about how we lean on outside organizations to help us with mental health needs in general, and other things, right? Because the schools take on a lot more than just education. This kind of thing is just a barrier to making those relationships and making it easier. And I'm not suggesting that people don't get any kind of vetting. I'm just suggesting that we do something that is, responsible, but doesn't take this amount of time, or even look into that.
But haven't we just established that this is also state law? So I think that I feel like we're going a little bit around in a circle here with very valid points, but if in fact it is, and it has been stated that it is state law, that you have to go through these background checks, and as Dr. Mike just explained, sort of every branch that's involved in his getting hired, I mean, there's not really a way to circumnavigate what is law. And this is state law, not.
It is state law.
Okay, I'm going to try to use something from Robert's rules. I think this is a point of order. I think we've gone around and around on a topic, and it is time to move on. And I don't mean that in a hostile sense, but I'm enjoying the conversation, but we do have an agenda.
Rebecca's on fire tonight with conversation. I'm sure, and I understand.
Yeah, and I understand as well, but going back to the beginning of the meeting, this is one where how a bill becomes a law is probably the process to look at. And also, I would say the second piece is we use a hand process for fingerprint. People have to go, for example, to a local police department or the sheriff's department. It takes a long time. There are efficiencies that you can do. There's electronic means, there's contractor means, and that's not something that Vermont is currently considering. So there are other pieces, but this is one of those cases where it is statute. So the next number 2 policy we have is draft alcohol and drug-free workplace. This is something that we had in place. Minor edits to reflect current language referring to substance use programs and delete or reference to a now defunct federal technical assistance. So this is a very minor update, but again, it illustrates why it's important to go through and update them so we don't get up to the process a point where we have so many out of date that it takes us a year and a half to update them like we did last year. Any questions on that policy?
Dr. Mike, Dr. Mike, the drug-free workplace, doesn't include like doctor prescribed medication that an adult can have with them on their person.
Although if it's a student, that they do have to go through the nurse. If they're on a medication, they would have to go to the nurse's office and check. So just standard school procedures. The kid can't bring in their own medication and self-medicate in school.
Just to clarify on that, I believe the Federal Register still prohibits marijuana. If there was somebody that had a prescription for that, it would still not be allowed in the schools. Is that right?
I have not encountered that situation in Vermont yet, but it would be something we would check with council once something came up, and I'm sure maybe if Allison Conyers were here, she probably already knows the answer for Vermont. But that's something that it is interesting, and I will probably check on that anyway. Thank you. Any other questions on that one? All right, and the next one is also a very technical minor update for draft pupil privacy rights. They've updated and changed one word. The first sentence in the model policy used the word intent, and the revised model policy replaces intent with it is the policy of the school district. So it's not the intent of the policy. It's not the intent of the district, it's the policy of the district. The next one is a larger one, and this is one that Danielle and Tori reviewed, and it was a pretty large policy that involved a lot of different areas, physical education, school nutrition, and recommended that we filter this through the school health advisory committee, of which there's a representative group. I'll call out Mr. Clark, who is the board rep. So this was vetted by a representative team of school and community people, including a board member who went through, made revisions. I know Ben was at that meeting, and Mandy and Shannon also brought that to me, and we sat in my office and took a final read through. And so this is coming to you after vetting from a larger group in the school district. And it is required by, at least currently, as long as the National School Lunch Program stays in effect, it is currently required by federal law.
Sort of more of a hypothetical question, but one of the questions I wrote down next is would this policy have to be rewritten on the fly if the federal funding for the lunch program changes? I would assume we would have to revisit this policy.
Probably, and this one came a kind of a draft with a lot of area for customization came from the state of Vermont, and this is one. Ben, it looks like Ben wants to make a comment.
So, in my experience, if they were to cut such a program, it would not be immediate. It would be starting the beginning of the following school year. So, and that's just because the funding for that would be sort of year to year. And it would not be something that we would necessarily have to do like right away on an emergency basis. But we would probably have to revise in order to be compliant with the state to answer your question. So we wouldn't have to do it right then and there and have some sort of emergency thing, but we would have to edit it, revise it, warn it, and do that in order to be compliant with the state's changes for that.
Any other questions? The next one is another big one, behavioral threat assessment teams. This was one of the requirements that came out of Act 29 of 2023. And those days when you wonder, what does the superintendent do behind the scenes? I've spent a lot of time on this one from an implementation standpoint, but also a kind of advocacy and work with the Agency of Education. So the Agency of Education started rolling out the training for this about 2 years ago. We've had at least one person in every building. Most buildings have had multiple people who've been trained in this process. So if a student in school makes a threat, some kind of threat, it goes to a team. That will go to a team. It becomes effective this coming school year. And there's a protocol you follow. The very first training I went to, it was run by a nationally certified school psychologist who kind of went through a kind of a model procedure that you follow with different involvement. So this policy started in draft form from the Agency of Education December 2023. There were recommendations from some different constituent groups, and then the state started talking to our groups again in January or February. I was part of the team from the Superintendent's Association who had conversations with the Agency of Education, and we made a lot of recommendations. I think the Agency of Education has also hired staff specifically for this, and I think this is one of those areas where I would really commend the Secretary for the work that they've done to make this a robust policy. But there's going to be other reporting procedures we follow. There's draft administrative guidelines that we're going to be putting into place. So this is, and I can tell you from being in one of the conversations, I was in a meeting at the Agency of Education with the Deputy Secretary, with the Person Operations Director who oversees this, and the state's General Counsel, Emily Simmons, who has strongly advised this policy. And when we would bring up different questions, a lot of times she had very strong legal recommendations based on the statutes that were put in place by the legislature. So this is one of those that comes that the legislature has said that the Agency of Education shall develop the model policy. And having seen the inside of that, I would say there's very good reasons why I, as a layman, would not want to go and make changes, wholesale changes, or even minor changes to this policy, because it has gone through about 1.5 years worth of eyes of very very smart people and very highly skilled people taking a look at this one.
Is the sourcing of threats, is it based solely on reporting, or is there an active effort to seek out threats that, like, I'm not sure how to word that.
There are states that have a following up on Connecticut that have a safe to say program that have developed reporting mechanisms outside of the school. Vermont has not done that, but it is for the most part reported by students or staff or community members, and I've been involved in conversations here and elsewhere where all those pieces came together.
There's subtleties to this based on age. I'd imagine a threat might be different from a 6-year-old than it is from a 16-year-old.
There is, and there's a very specific protocol that's, again, research-based, nationally produced, that we've gone through trainings on, of following step by step, having people with different perspectives with the student in that conversation to see. I mean, the key word is it a credible threat? And that's what you have to determine through the process.
Yes, Pam, but so if a student comes in brandishing a gun, that would be a credible threat.
That would not need to go through the threat assessment process. Yes. That would fall under the weapons policy, yes.
That would fall under the imminent threat category that allows them to use their discretion. I just had a notice there's a random extra period between two paragraphs that we could remove probably. But I was wondering, like, what is the line between like someone coming and brandishing a weapon where the personnel are able to use their discretion versus following? Is there like guidance on that? Is there training on that? Like, how does that actually work in reality?
There is training, and there's also kind of situational pieces. So I've been part of a lot of times, mostly elsewhere, but here as well, where a student will come in and go to their teacher and say, I was out. I've never seen I've never seen a gun since I've been an administrator, but I have seen knives, and I was out hunting and I forgot this was in my backpack, and very responsibly goes to someone. In those situations, I've always advised principals to call the family, send home a copy of the policy. But if you have a student coming in saying, I forgot, we're not going to suspend a student out of school for an honest mistake of which that they then take ownership and immediately do the right thing. But I will say that all of our schools do a good job of encouraging students to do responsible reporting. And again, early in my superintendency, not here, but I did have a situation where a third grader brought had a loaded weapon that he took from his home and had it on the bus, and a student saw that and reported it. And it was a very scary situation. It was reported on locally, so I'm not breaching any confidentiality, but that's why you do have procedures and protocols, and have people who encourage students to report things that they see that should not be in school. And that's how we find out most of our threats. A lot of times here we've had situations and we have really good students who know right and wrong, and in most cases it's students who report things that don't sound right. Huh?
So this is about creating a team.
Right.
The team is going to act at all. Like what those protocols will be determined.
It's a very good point. And we didn't have the review for new board members of policies and procedures. So a board policy says these are the things we should be doing. And then the next piece, under the authority of the superintendent, is develop administrative procedures, which is the how-to. How does this get implemented in schools? So this is one that has procedures with it. We have, if you look through the board policy website, you'll see a lot of, numbers of board policy H5, and then after that is H5P, which is procedure, which is how we implement it. So the board is not in charge of writing the procedures. The board can see a procedure and say, hey, superintendent, we'd like to hear about this, and you can recommend to me changes, and that's something that I would then take very seriously, bring back, take a look at, do due diligence on. So that's that next layer. And then under that, part of the procedures is training for the teams, and then that's where the Agency of Education has also contracted with some really intense professionals from across the country who have a lot of experience in this areas, and they're the ones through the training where you get the protocols of how to follow, how to assess, how to make those judgments and next steps. A good question. One is draft selection of library materials, and again, this is from legislative action. We had a library materials policy before, but this is, I think, far more detailed, and it's a result of statutory language passed last session. And there's also corresponding segments. Ashley's talked to the board about educational quality standards. You'll see some references to educational quality standards in some of the descriptions. And what I had one board member before who said what he liked, Steve mentioned that it very specifically lists what that criteria is in the policy, and then it also will follow in the procedures. Yes. And there's procedures in sometimes you'll see procedures in the policy, but then there will still be a reference to developing further procedures that kind of go down to that next level. But there are some times when they feel that they need to put some of those details in the policy.
Oh, yeah.
So I was very pleased to see this list of materials that cannot be deselected. I thought it was very precise. But it says superintendent will implement a policy. So, for example, or procedure, sorry, what would a procedure look like if I say this book makes me really uncomfortable, I want it out of the library?
The procedures are currently under development through some of our constituent groups. Again, I had a pretty extensive policy and procedures before, and the procedures talked about how a parent challenges that book, and then what the process is with the due process is for that piece of it then goes to a committee, and those procedures may list out what that meeting looks like, how the representative members on that. There's probably going to be a librarian, a school principal, the curriculum director, and then how they make those selections based on the procedures that are developed. But what you want to avoid in those situations is that it's the judgment of one person. It's important that there's a representative group who are reviewing that book and making decisions based on a very specific set of criteria and based on the policy.
Yes, I was also glad to see that there's quite a bit of information for the approval or deselection of materials, but there is a typo that we might want to take out. On the administrative responsibilities, paragraph 1B says deselection of materials 4. We might want to take out that extra.
You've also pointed that out, and if you go online, you'll see that it's already been deleted. But thank you. And I appreciate the big picture questions, but also the details if there's something that is not correct. Community engagement and vision, and they also there was another one that was recommended to be deleted that had some of the same pieces, but this incorporates a lot of the requirements that are stated in the district quality standards and the educational quality standards that both take effect on July 1st, and that's why this policy was recommended to be revised by School Board Association.
Yeah, so there's an inclusive process. Is that processes that they're identifying that becomes part of our work plan for the following year, or how do we?
I think it's discussing when there is that vision process that there should be a representative community engagement piece. And the next one is similar to library materials, and this is they were incorporated before, but there's a selection and access to instructional materials for the classroom. And again, this is updated with some language that aligns with the revised educational quality standards.
In this policy, in the second paragraph on implementation, I was surprised to see that it says the board will establish and ensure the curriculum. I didn't know we did that.
Well, you establish the curriculum by directing what the graduation requirements should be, for example, and that there is proper people like Shannon to work with the team. But the board, I think the main word there is ensure, that it's your job to make sure that we have establish and ensure that we have a curriculum in place. And Shannon, do you want to add anything to that based on your experience?
Sorry, can you tell I don't talk often? No, I don't have too much to add to that. Just that if you're interested in what our learning outcomes are, you can go to our website and click on curriculum and technology, and then you can see by grade level what we expect all kids to learn and be able to do. And then we align all of our assessments and lesson and unit materials based on those learning outcomes. And we also have we have a policy on graduation requirements, yes? And so all of those learning outcomes are based on those graduation requirements.
Other questions on that one? Okay, go ahead.
And the next one is this is one when I compared the two side by side and I had to find where the reference was. It's a very small reference that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires procedures to be adopted, but not a policy specifically. So they kind of recategorized the recommended model policy. So that was a very small technical change for this one that doesn't really change the intent. And then the last two are just ones that I had said that they're recommended for deletion, but the board also warns deletion of policies. Personnel files was a standalone policy, and they've determined that that's more of a administrative function procedure. So they're not recommending that as a board policy anymore. And then we have another one that it was closely aligned to the school community relations, so that's recommended for replacement.
Do you have any more? Go ahead.
So if I understood the process, we did our first reading tonight. We're hopefully going to vote to warn them for the second reading for the next meeting, and then they'll be adopted and implemented immediately and deleted immediately or effective immediately.
After the board would take that next vote for adoption, then the next morning Shannon would go in and she would replace the existing one with the current one. And Shannon Wisdom's the one who works with me on this piece too. She wears a lot of hats, about a dozen different hats, and this is one of them. So she helps the format, and then she will make them active and delete the old ones.
Thank you for that, Dr. Mike. That was detailed and good. So any other questions on those? Okay. All right, then we will proceed to the consent agenda. So the consent agenda for okay, I'll just tell these new girls that the consent agenda is when we kind of lump in a lot of things together that are just board business, things that have already happened and things that are procedure are coming up. So I'm going to read it out. The consent agenda is to approve the minutes from 5/14/25, to approve the warrants from 5/9/2025 for the amount of $1,122.50, and the warrants from 5/21/25 for $971,827.91, for a total of $972,950.41. We are also accepting the professional staff employment change in status of the individuals listed per the effective date for the 2025-26 school year. And we are consenting to warn the policies for the second and final reading that we just went over. Does anyone have any questions about the consent agenda? Okay, then I'm looking for a motion to pass that.
So motioned.
Ben motions, Rebecca seconds. Here we have our tally sheet. So we're going to take a roll call vote. Why not? For the last time, Celia Wing.
Yes.
Ellie.
Yeah.
V.
Yes.
Bobby. JB. Cindy. John is absent. Rob. Ben.
Yes.
Corey.
Yes.
Emily.
Yes.
And Pam.
Yes.
Rebecca. Mike is absent. Dan. Steve. That's all of us. Oh, yeah, yeah. Mike is out and so is John. Okay, that will pass with 80%. Okay. Ellie, do you want to make a motion to adjourn? Unless, wait, one more thing. Sorry. Go ahead.
I did want to go back because I told you I would look up the statute for clearances and I'll read what the statute says. It says superintendents, headmasters of recognized or approved independent schools and their contractors shall request criminal record informations for the following. The person, a superintendent or headmaster, is prepared to recommend for any full-time, part-time, and temporary employment. Any person directly under contract to an independent school, like that doesn't apply. 3, any employee of a contractor under contract to a school district who is in a position that may result in unsupervised contact with school children. So that's the piece. And it very clearly says the superintendent shall. So not getting it from another source. And then further down, the question about the under this, a person convicted of a sex offense that requires registration pursuant to 13 VSA Chapter 167, Subchapter 3, shall not be eligible for employment under this section. But I do have broad discretion for anything else, whether I recommend the person or not.
Hey, it's your big moment, babe.
I move to adjourn.
Second. All right. All those in favor. Thank you, Ellie and Celia. We'll miss you.